So I have to click on here. Welcome to the 21st event of Salesforce Architect in Making. This one would be dedicated on scalability and everything about this topic. We have two beautiful speakers in Marlene, who is acting as a Salesforce Solution Architect at Hertz, and we have Karishma, who is a Senior Director of Product Scalability at Salesforce. I will be your host, meaning I will try to collect your questions and make sure that the event is going fine. So yeah, without further ado, let's go further into what are the rules, what we wanted to achieve as a group. We basically helping people to prepare for the technical architect certification. So Salesforce Architect in the Making, what do you think we're doing? And the content which is there hopefully would help you with such a difficult topic as scalability, but also to prepare for the certification. We are not affiliated with Salesforce in any way, so everything that you're going to hear this is personal opinion of people. So that's important disclaimer. And talking about other boring stuff, but still important, is housekeeping rules. Please keep yourself muted unless you want to be humiliated on the recording. And ask all questions on chat. We will try to look at them and ask to the speakers as soon as possible. Yeah, if you find any mistake in the presentation, if you don't agree with anything, it would be great to point it in the question and yeah, let us know. And last and the most important thing, if you're interested in presenting the hosting, please reach out, because everybody is welcome, and especially in presenting stuff, always a pleasure to have you. So with having said that, I guess I'm leaving the floor to and giving it to Marlene for the first part of our meeting. Marlene, can you share your screen?
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate it. Lilith and I have had a chance to chat a couple of times, and it will be great to share some of my knowledge. So let me share my screen. There we go. So today I'm going to be talking about two different topics. The first one is last year I had a pretty big project where we removed 3 terabytes of data from the org. So there were lots of things that we encountered and that we learned in removing all that data. And then I'll talk about some of the things to keep in mind when you have a very large org, how that impacts your everyday running of an org. Things like automations, SQL queries, and as well as doing batch jobs. But let's start with removing data. So I joined Hertz middle of last year, and when I started, I noticed that we were at 95% data storage consumed, and we were going up by about 1% every month, if not a little bit more. So definitely we got on this initiative right away because we wanted to make sure we stayed under 100%, and then we got that cleaned up before the end of the year. Our contract was due at the end of the year as well, so we had a pretty good target date to say, by this date, we need to remove data. Otherwise, we're going to keep paying for it in future contracts. The way that we attacked this is we first started by doing a simple audit on the org. We went through and we classified all of our data into different domains, and we calculated how fast those objects were growing. Based on how fast they were growing, we identified several areas that we can look at and see, what can we do about this data? Does it make sense to keep it in Salesforce, or can we do something else with it? As you can see, we pretty quickly targeted about 60% of the data just to look to see where we can go with it. So the first thing that we did is audit history. We have a process in our org that is kind of like supercharged field history. We need to store every single field that changes on a few objects, and we couldn't do that with standard field history or with some of the other products that Salesforce offers. So we built something custom a very long time ago. I looked at it, and we were creating about an average of 1.3 million records per day. So every single month, we were growing this by more than 30 million records. Definitely was growing very quickly and using a lot of our data storage. We partnered with Salesforce because we wanted to see what we can do by moving this data externally. We did not have the option of just archiving it or deleting it. We need to have it forever. It's one of the legal requirements that we have in our org. So we said, great, we need it forever. What can we really do with it? We decided to implement the Salesforce connector. It's a great tool. It has a couple different options. You can connect with ODBC. You can connect to AWS with S3 Bucket or Dynamo. For our purposes, we learned that S3 Bucket was not a good option because it's for read only. So while we could use it for other purposes, because this data is being created in Salesforce and stored in AWS, we had to do something different. So we chose DynamoDB because it's bidirectional. We also learned that the Salesforce connector supports 100,000 records to be created every hour. Well, if you remember, my average is 1.3 per day, so that's okay, right? It's going to handle 2.4 million for the day. We're fine. The other lesson that I learned is that my org has certain peak hours where usually Mondays we have a massive amount of data that gets loaded to the environment. And so we had 2 or 3 hours on Monday where we would create much more than 100,000 records per hour. So we figured out, wait, we can't just look at the daily average, we have to look at the hour. So definitely when you're looking to implement a new product from Salesforce, make sure you're looking at the lowest common denominator for the limit. And I know that makes sense, but when you're working on a project very fast, we just kind of skip that. But we figured it out right away and we're able to make a fix there. The other thing that we learned is AWS can have glitches and hiccups. So sometimes the writes to AWS were failing when we were going directly from production into AWS. So we decided to tweak our design a little bit. And instead of going straight from when the record gets created in Salesforce into AWS, we store it in Salesforce in our custom object that already existed. And then we have an hourly batch job that moves the data from Salesforce into AWS. So that allowed us to say, we're going to make sure we keep this data. It's a legal requirement. We're not losing anything, and we'll be able to continue to move this forward very well. But part of the project was to do a catch up. So we had to move 870 million records off of Salesforce onto AWS. By the time this was due, we had about 2 weeks left to do it. And so there was no way we can do it through a batch job. Apex limits were going to hinder us from getting that done on time. So the other lesson that we learned is always look at your whole set of tools that you have available. We ended up using actually our backup tool that puts the data into AWS already for us. We put that into an S3 bucket. Then the AWS team took that data, they multi-threaded it and imported it into the DynamoDB from S3. They were able to do all that in 6 hours. And so there's no way we could match that speed by using our Salesforce only tools. So just make sure when you're looking at large data orgs, right, you're looking at everything, not just Salesforce. So that was the first area. It was a big success. We were able to move 20% of the data completely off Salesforce onto AWS, and we were able to reduce our data storage on the org by that much and actually a little bit more. And plus the cost of the Salesforce connector and the storage of AWS is less than the cost of storing that in Salesforce. We decided not to use big objects because big objects are don't have the same, they have some limits that would have caused us to have some issues. The cost of using big objects would have been more than storing it in AWS. Thank you, that's a good question. My next example of how we manage the data is we looked at the next domain, the B2B sales data. Only about 2% of my account and contact records are B2B sales records in Salesforce, but they were taking up 20% of the data. So I looked to see why are they using so much of the data if there's so few of the actual contact records. What I found is we had 5 objects that are being used for reporting. They're used to create a business revenue summary report. And we load that data from another system on the 3rd of the month. So you can imagine the 3rd of the month is very busy on our org. We load millions of records and update them into the system. During this process, originally I thought, hey, this data can stay in the data platform. We can use Salesforce Connect to connect to it and never move it. It turned out that I did not need to get the Salesforce Connector license or that cost. Instead, what was happening is our ETL jobs were loading the data every month. And really, the newest data is the correct data. Everything loaded before that was obsolete. It was no longer valid. So what we learned here is make sure you know your data flows. What is ETL doing to your org? What kind of data are they creating? A lot of times the ETL team might not have some of the deep Salesforce expertise that you have, and they might say, oh, it's just data. I can just put it on there. It's no big deal. So we were able to just purge 750 million records. Those made sense to purge because we already had the source data in other systems and in our BI tool. So it did not make sense to archive it, and we could just remove it from our org. We opened up a case with Salesforce because we did need to remove these on a small, short period of time. They increase our limits for bulk batch jobs to, I think, 20,000 for a few weeks so that this can be done, query the data and purge it. We did do it manually. I know that's not great, but it was a one-time fix and we needed to get done quickly by the contract deadline. Right now, our ETL team is still loading the data every month. And so we're working with them to actually automate that. And either they're going to purge it on their side and make sure that we're only loading the proper data to Salesforce, or on this one, we may do an Apex batch job to delete data that has not been updated in 2 to 3 months. So on this one, we didn't remove all 20% of the data that the B2B team was using, but we definitely removed the large amount of it, and it made a huge impact. This was probably about 10 to 12% of the data that we're able to remove and save from the org. My next example is we also have Marketing Cloud in our ecosystem. And so along with Marketing Cloud and some other objects, we have data that we really only use one time. A good example is we get a request to send an email to one of our customers. That goes through Salesforce Core first. Then we parse that request, and that creates 10 or 11 related objects. Then that data is sent to Marketing Cloud, and the email is sent. Well, those 11 records that I just mentioned are only used one time. There is no need to keep them. The original request that we get for the email has all of the data. So for that example, we were able to just say, those are convenience copy records. We can delete them from the org. We have other objects that get created to generate an ID, and it's only used for that one purpose. So those objects, we decided we're going to archive them in case we need them in the past, just to be very conservative. But either way, we're able to remove them from the org. So from about 40 objects, we were able to delete almost, actually, we've gone over 1 billion records at this point from last year to this year. We were able to delete 1 billion records, and we've archived 700 million records to our archiving platform. And again, this has been a huge savings. We purged about 1 billion records between last year and this year, but we were able to save the data storage. So again, this is a great example of knowing what data you have in your org, how long do you need it, and taking an active stance of why do I need to keep this data in my org. And again, you can see it's such a different mindset to talk about your org in millions of records, billions of records, just because it's a very different scale that we're working with. So now I want to talk about just how do you keep your org lean and clean, right? It obviously took us a lot of effort last year to reduce our org. We reduced it by about 35% data storage altogether, which meant that our contract was also able to remove that data storage cost, which is really great. But how do we keep it up? So definitely, I want to talk about optimizing your data model. So make sure that when you are creating data in your org, you know how it's related to itself, that you're not creating a skew, because that will affect how you're able to purge or archive the data in your org. Definitely know all of the data flows that are being used for your org. How are customers being created? Do you have manual loads, ETL loads, API, or any other ways that your data is being created? Because some of them sometimes have runaway processes, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Definitely consider off-platform storage. We have I don't even know how many rental records in our company, but we would never store those in Salesforce because Salesforce is not our system of record for rentals and reservations. We do have APIs that we call out when we need that information. So that will remain off platform and we'll only get whatever we need. Obviously, we're using external objects with AWS, and we're also looking to see how can we connect Salesforce to our data lake to make sure that we have access to the data, but we don't store it in Salesforce. We want to keep it as lean as possible. Audit your data regularly. You're going to find data bugs. Bugs are not just in code. And so I'll give you one of the horror stories here that I know Lilith teased about. When I was looking at our org last year, we had cleaned up all the data that I already talked about, but I noticed our chat events were growing exponentially. We got to about 450 million chat events. And I wondered, why do we have so many? What's causing this growth? So I looked at the data model for chat transcripts. And if you're not aware, every time you have a chat transcript, that creates one chat visitor, one chat session, at least 5 chat events, if not more, and also a few other related records. So one chat transcript in your org actually creates 8 records. That can very quickly mushroom in your org and really grow your data footprint considerably. So what I found out is there's a process that creates the same chat transcript multiple times. It actually creates them up to 350 times. I know you're wondering why we would let that happen, but it's just something that one of our external users of Salesforce was doing that. And we found the issue, but in the meantime, we had to go clean up all the data. We created a batch process to say, just give me one unique version of that live chat transcript, keep the oldest one because that was the first one that we received and the date mattered, and purge the rest. So we were able to remove that data and get back down to more reasonable data options. Every once in a while, and I know it's hard to find time, but I'll go look at our data storage. I'll see if any objects are growing fast, and I'll just go and bungee into the data and say, how much data was created today, this month, this week? Let me see if I see any spikes and patterns of massive data being created. And there's been other bugs that we have found similar to this one, where we'll realize one of the API calls added a space at the end of the last name of the customer, which means in Salesforce, now I'm not going to find a match because Apex is going to truncate that ending space, right? So I'm like, oh, wait, that's a bug. Let's go fix it. Let's go handle it. So again, those audits are really going to help you find those data bugs. Also have strong data management. And what I mean by that is obviously we're purging or archiving in our org, but we're also talking with our business to see why do they need certain data in the environment. Right now, we're going to be archiving case management data, and that means that's about 20 different objects once you look at the whole data model that's behind that. We've been working with our business users and we said, great, we are recommending that we keep current year and prior year because that'll give you month-over-month reporting and year-over-year reporting. Anything beyond that, we're going to be archiving. A couple of our business partners pushed back and they said, no, I want to be able to report for 4 or 5 years. So at that point, we said, well, for those purposes, we need to use a reporting tool. So let's work with our business intelligence partners. Let's get your data into that environment, and it will let you report that data for a longer period of time. But within Salesforce, other than reporting year over year, there's very little use cases to keep the case data in Salesforce. So we're going to move forward to remove that. And that's what I mean by strong data management. Not just keeping data off the platform, but also knowing when it makes sense to remove it from the org as well. So I hope these things will help you keep your org clean. Again, in the prior, when I've worked with other companies, I would worry when an object got over 1 million records. Right now in our current org, if it's 1 million, 10 million, we don't worry about it. We look at objects that are considerably larger. And I know a lot of you are wondering, Salesforce tells you not to do that. And I will agree with that, except that I will tell you that our org is actually very performant and it works really well. If we see any issues, we go fix them. And I've been amazed. The largest object that we had was that auto history object with 870 million records, and it was running fine. It was being archived fine, not archived, sorry, backed up. And it just, if it wasn't causing a problem, we kind of left it alone. And so for Data Cloud, I think Data Cloud is really interesting for us. We're playing with it right now as in we're thinking about working with it. Our data volumes are very interesting when we look at Data Cloud and how it's priced. But I think it's a great opportunity for us to say, do we have the customer in here too many times? How do we create that golden record and get a data merged? That was one of the goals that we had for this year, but we've had many other things going on that getting our customer profiles merged will be an initiative for next year, but it's something that definitely gets lots of attention from us. Sharing and visibility, when you move the data out, it is removed and only some users that have access. We use a tool called Own Backup. So if you've used that in the past, if you have the permission set, you're still able to search the data that you've archived. And so the archive data, let's say you have a GDPR request, which is a great example. Somebody submits saying, I don't want to be in your system anymore. Own backup lets us search for any customers or any data that's related to that customer and do the GDPR process that we need to do for it. But you have to have that permission to access that data. For anything that gets purged, it just gets purged, right? It's completely removed. For the external object that I talked about earlier, we created a Lightning Web component that will access the data from that external object and present it to the user in a better way. We could have done the standard layout for the external object, but that didn't make sense for a use case. The way the data is stored, it's kind of ugly, and the Lightning Web component worked really well. All right, thank you everybody for your questions. I'm going to move on to our next topic. And again, I took a note from Lilith. And so I want to talk about Frankenstein orgs, right? Maybe you've built one. I know I built one a very, very long time ago. I learned lots of things through doing that, but I've also inherited a lot of orgs, and I look at them and I wonder, why did somebody do this, and how is this hodgepodge together, right? So they're Frankenstein orgs, but definitely when you add the large data volume aspect to it, you end up having nightmares about hitting limits. We have a process where we go look at our error logs and say, are we seeing a spike in something? Today I looked at some of our email to case processing. It's hitting too many SQL limits, so too many queries hit. So I need to go figure out why that's happening, right? So let me give you some examples of how we've dealt with those. So SQL, right? You need to make sure, I talked about your data model needs to be very strong when you have large data volumes. And I'll give you an example. It's not from a prior org, it's from a prior environment that I've been in. The use case was basically there was an external monitoring system that would see if there was an issue with the customer's equipment. And if there was an issue, it would send the data to Salesforce, and that needed to create a case, and they needed to associate that case with the parent asset record. And the reason I say parent is because this org in particular had created 5 layers of asset records. So the parent is layer 1, and depending on the pieces beneath it, it would have up to 4 more layers in it. So we had a lot of customers that actually had more than 50,000 assets because of the way that this had been architected, right? And so when you were trying to create the case, you would hit that wonderful error of more than 50,000 records found. We're not going to create the case at all. When we looked at the query, we just needed to add a parameter to the where clause to say, only give me asset records that are parents. We made sure that that had been indexed. And then all of a sudden, instead of getting the error, we were getting back only 100 or so records that were assets that qualified to be associated with the case. So definitely SQL, you want to make sure your queries are very, very optimized. Make sure you're creating index fields on your objects. Make sure your queries have selective filters. And I don't know if anybody knows this, but I know I've seen this a couple of times. When I'm building a query, if my where clause starts with my standard index fields first, and then followed by my custom index fields, it runs better. If I start with custom or if I combine them, they don't run as well. So it's just something that I've seen myself. I don't have any documentation as to why that would be, but I wanted to share it here because it's one of those things that you learn as you're working in an org. Definitely request skinny tables. To give you a different story, right now we're about to double the number of fields on our case object. We've done our due diligence. It makes sense to put those fields on the case object, but we were talking about, is an index enough? And we ended up agreeing that we're going to request from Salesforce to create the skinny table because we know it's going to be faster to scan a table that has 20 columns than one that has 200 to 300. And so don't be scared of skinny tables. Make sure that you are following the processes. It takes opening up a case with Salesforce, giving them the reason that you want the skinny table, and they will work with you. It usually takes a couple of weeks to get done. So make sure you include that in your project plan to make sure you have the time to get that done. Remember with skinny tables, if you add more fields, you want to make sure you maintain them. And that just requires a case with Salesforce, which is pretty easy to do. Avoid querying formula fields. And actually, I would go as far as saying avoid creating any formula fields. And I don't know if any of you guys would disagree with me, but whenever I see a formula field, it just makes me cringe. If I have to look at a table that I'm talking about 10 million records, my formulas are being calculated on the fly, right? I don't want that to delay whatever process I'm trying to run. So I prefer a static field that gets populated through a flow or Apex than a formula field. And of course, use Query Optimizer. Make sure you're looking at your queries to make sure that they're running as fast as possible. Definitely, Arun, your question about the skinny table. if you're adding any new index fields to your object, but you're not using them in SQL or Apex or Flow, you don't need to update your skinny table. It's only if it's being used in code or Flow. So I know we have some API calls that we added a couple index fields. We added to our API REST, our Apex REST services, and we opened up a case with Salesforce to maintain them. We don't actually add that many indexes throughout the year. I would say this year, maybe we've added 5 or 10 fields that would qualify, and we submitted the tickets with Salesforce to update the skinny tables, and they partner with us very well. Let me go on to the next slide. So batch jobs. Batch jobs in a large org are just mind-numbing at times. One of the things we need to do is we need to delete 870 million records, right, in 2 weeks. So this data was only in Salesforce. I didn't have enough time to work with the ETL team for them to create the jobs. I couldn't use any other processes like archiving to remove them because I would have run too slow. So the solution was really to create a batch job. We wanted to make sure we were hard deleting this data because if you put it in your recycling bin, it stays around for a while, right? And that's still going to affect your org. So make sure you're confirming that you can hard delete data when you're deleting data, and it's going to help you considerably. We created a custom object for batch job. And the reason we did a custom object is because we wanted to track the history of changing any of those settings. And if we had done that through custom settings, you can't track any historical changes there. A custom metadata would have required a deployment. So we decided to do with a very easy custom object that lets us define the name of the batch job and then some really properties around it. Should that job be rescheduled? How often should it be rescheduled? What are the start and end dates of that job? Because that lets us have a batch job self-heal and self-update, and it can just churn through a very large data volume without having an individual person monitoring it, make sure it's not failing and all those things. So one of the things that I've yet to see anywhere in the Salesforce documentation is when you create a new batch job, I think it should be a best practice to check how many active jobs are running. If you have hit your limit of 5, which is a standard limit, you should not even start your batch job. You should just stop and reschedule it yourself. And the code can do that. So we have methods that will look, do I have my maximum number of jobs running? Yes, great. Reschedule it at this interval. And that interval is set on that custom object. Definitely use query locator for large data sets. In the documentation, I think it says that a query locator will pull back up to 20 million records to process them through a batch. I will tell you a secret. That will never, ever work. If you are trying to pull back 20 million records in your query, it's going to time out. Even though you have the best, most optimized query in the world, I had one where it was just create select ID from this date to that date, and it was create a date. And that was timing out. So we had to make sure that we were trying to query back about 2 to 3 million records for our batch jobs, and those were running fine. We didn't have to worry about them failing or having to be restarted. Definitely use query locator, but also make sure that your jobs are running in smaller batches than 20 million. It's just not going to run. And then run in small date ranges. Our batch jobs tend to have either a created date start and end date, or something else that don't use last modified date because it's not indexed. Use system mod date if you need to use because it's been changing with a certain time period, or some other date indicator in it. And it's those little things that will make your jobs run a little bit faster. So that's for batch jobs. Let me go on to my third one, automation nightmares. And so I'm sure all of you guys have been working, or maybe you're already done, converting your workflow rules and your process builders into flows. We had this last year. We had 6 workflow rules that we needed to convert into one before save flow. Pretty easy, no big deal, right? And what ended up happening is, unfortunately, that flow was created without any entry criteria. And for every field that needed to be updated, it was doing an update DML instead of an assignment. And so what ended up happening is this did make it to production, unfortunately, but we noticed that we were seeing delays in both records being created on the UI and, more importantly, on API calls. For API calls, I have a 2-second SLA where if I don't reply within 2 seconds, the calling system will consider it a failure. So even though Salesforce might succeed in what it's doing, it still comes back as a failure and potentially can create a large production ticket for me. And so what we did is we made sure that our sorry, I can't quite see my whole slide. We made sure that we can check how the performance of our automations are running. In a little bit, Karishma is going to talk about the Scale Center. If you guys have not played with it, it's been very useful for me. I was able to run a test and say, how was this running before we deployed the flow, and how was it running after we did deploy the flow? And we could really see a difference in CPU consumption. We also partnered with our TAM Salesforce, and she was able to give me a full report of that information. That helped us confirm that that was the issue. Plus, it makes sense, right? Make sure your flows are built efficiently. Otherwise, they're still going to take more resources than you plan for. We updated the flow to have entry criteria, and then we did assignment, and now it's running fine. So best practices that we've implemented for our org is we are going to be able to use before save flows if we're updating the same record. We have decided that our flow is going to be mutually exclusive. So because we have very distinct domains, B2B, B2C, we want to make sure those flows are running on those record types. That way they're not overlapping and they're not potentially running multiple times, or I'm sorry, multiple flows are running on the same record transaction. We're also have decided that we can use a flow for after save actions if it's an object with low volume. Anything with low volume for us is considered less than 1 million records. Anything over 1 million, we're going to use Apex for after save. We just have seen that with large data volumes, Apex runs more efficiently than Flow at this time. And hopefully in the future, if that improves, we can go ahead and open up that tool for us. But for now, Apex makes a lot more sense. Make sure you're monitoring your system to see what's taking up the most consumption, whether it's Apex, batch jobs, or flows, and put that in your backlog for tech debt. It will definitely make your org run faster. And especially for me, I have so many API calls that are pulling data from Salesforce. I want to make sure those are running really efficiently. So hopefully these tips helped you guys. And I see a question about before save. Let me read that really quick. So they do the same thing. So the update DML on a flow and an assignment does the same thing. But if you compare the way that it runs on, if you did a debug log on it and you did 6 updates on a before save flow versus 6 assignments, you're going to see a big difference on how fast the flow runs. And so really, even though it does the same thing, just the update DML is consuming more resources. So the best practice is to have as few pink elements on your flow as possible. And in that scenario, you didn't even need any. So it was better to replace them with assignments. And I see that it's not possible to do a DML on a before save flow. You're right. The only one that you can do is update. And I wish it would go away. If you try to do an update on a before save Apex class or method, it fails. It tells you that's not allowed. And so one of those things, I've been surprised that Salesforce hasn't removed it yet, because it really should not be doing an update. That is everything that I had for you guys. Thank you so much for your questions. If you have any more, as you guys are covering other things, feel free to post them and I'll answer them in the chat. So now we're ready for Karishma.
All right, let me share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see the presentation.
Yes, all good.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for joining us today and taking the time to be here. We saw some great examples on how to handle a large data volume org. I am Karishma Lalwani. I'm a Senior Director of Product at Salesforce. I've been at Salesforce for 10 years, and the first 5 years, I was an architect on the field working with our customers. So a lot of stuff that you just heard, I have also dealt with it in my past life when I was an architect. And little bit of the products that you will see are actually inspired from the pain points that I felt in building these enterprise solutions on our platform. So 5 years ago, I joined product and I said, okay, there's this huge gap of customers understanding whether the application will scale, where are they hitting the limits, how do they go about mitigating risks even before they deploy. So the idea of Scale Center was actually born through that experience on the field. And I'm fortunate enough to see it come to life. Now that the product is available, it's generally available to all our unlimited edition customers. So I'm going to talk about a what is broadly in our portfolio, what do we care about on our team, and then how can you use these products, and followed by a quick demo as well. So let me move on. Quick safe harbor, you know the drill. There are certain products that are not generally available yet, but I will be talking about it in today's call, and I'll also call those out. So please be mindful of that. So when it comes to scaling, we all understand that scaling efficiently is hard. These are some statistics that we ran based on the cases and the investigations that we see from customers. 70% of the performance issues only occur once you actually deploy the solution in production. And I'll talk about the reasons in a bit, but production, when it comes to production, you have all the data, all your users, everything happening at the same time, and you can't really replicate that day in a life in a sandbox. It's typically hard. And that's where we see this. How do we mitigate that? Is by doing scale tests early on in your sandboxes. And interestingly enough, we saw that only 1% of our customers were actually even requesting a performance test or a scale test from Salesforce. This is the number that we want to really go up. 1% is too less. We are risking a lot of customers. Customers are risking their business impact and user impact by not testing at scale even before they go live. Now, I talked about the metrics, but what causes these numbers? What is happening today? Why do we not have confidence? Why are we reactive? And why are we inefficient? So if we look at the ALM typical life cycle, there are some gaps that we see today. During design times, we don't have enough patterns or guidance to understand what are the scale requirements and what is the best API, for example. Marlene talked about, leverage off platform when there is large data, things like that you're hearing as a result of someone's experience should be integrated upfront in our products to tell you, hey, you're someone new, you're starting, these are the things that you should consider. Even at build time, when you're using Code Builder, Lightning Builder, there's not a lot of information there to say whether whether the page that you build has too many components, for example, and it won't scale. Or if you're writing a piece of code for in Apex for the builder to tell you, this line of code is not going to scale for 1 million users. So all that insight is lacking today in our product. For test, what we've observed is, first of all, customers do not really think about performance testing. It's almost like an afterthought. And for some of those who truly care and understand why it's important, we don't have production grade sandbox capacity for you to test. Even if you test 20% of your volume, chances are you'll get throttled because of the multi-tenancy environment. When it comes to deployment, there's not much visibility into what's going on. Like how much CPU consumption, Marlene mentioned, she's used Scale Center, you'll see why. Where is my bottleneck? What's the database consumption? What are the areas that I need to really optimize? There is not much out there today. And then finally, when we come to from a growing standpoint, these issues keep recurring. You're working with TAMs, you're raising a case with Salesforce, you're trying to understand what caused the batch job delay. But what if you had all of these insights at the right time and as a self-serve manner where you yourself can have control over them? That is where we are looking to really bring these into the ALM for getting that extrapolation and truly trying to shift left. How do we shift left? How do we get to green even before those issues occur? So our vision here at Scalability Products is we want to make it easy for you to implement these monstrous, complex solutions. And at every step of the way, we want to hold your hand in when it comes to design, build, test, really get these insights to you at the right place at the right time. So the first product that I'm going to talk about, this is the one that is in pilot right now. It's in Hyperforce. So if you have a customer or if you are a customer in Hyperforce, you can contact us and we will get you signed up. This is basically how do we approach from a customer standpoint, our most critical business peak, whether it's for a retail customer, it could be Black Friday. For a healthcare customer, it could be open enrollments. Like anywhere in your journey from a business standpoint, if you have a peak coming where you anticipate a huge amount of users to be present for those 24 hours, 48 hours, we are going to give you this feature in a Hyperforce sandbox where you can conduct 100% of your scale test. So whatever is your anticipated production load, today there is no way you can get this from Salesforce. There is no approval as well. You'll be limited. But if you were to enable this feature, this is going to be an add-on to the sandbox. For a limited time, you can request number of days or number of weeks. You can block it. And this is where we will match your sandbox to production scale, hereby enabling you to actually conduct that 100% of user load testing. This is going to be available end of this year in US. So we are working towards quickly releasing it. It will be a paid SKU. The charge would be by the number of test days that you purchase. So let's say if you want to test once a quarter for 5 days, that's what you will purchase, and it will be consumption based. So there is more to come on this one. The second product is Scale Center. This is actually generally available. So if you have an org that is unlimited edition, full copy sandbox and production, as well as if you're a signature customer, you should see this today. So if you go to the org, and I'll show you where to find it, but Scale Center is available at no cost. You just have to turn it on using a simple switch in the setup menu. This is basically our observability, real-time observability tool that we have deployed within your org, within your app. So when you go to Scale Center, you will start seeing important metrics. We saw, things like row locks or CPU timeouts or concurrent Apex was up there on one slide. These are the use cases that customers deal with on a day in and out basis, but it takes weeks to understand what caused that limit and a lot of troubleshooting. But this is where we want to be able to give you insights right within Scale Center itself so that you can actually act on it. Not only are we showing you insights, we're also showing you the bottleneck. Where is the bottleneck? So that we'll see that in the demo a little bit. And the goal is overall to make your implementation more performant and more scalable using these insights. The third product is Apex Guru. This is again in pilot, and this is available. If you're a Scale Center customer, you can sign us up for the pilot program. This is your anti-pattern detection. We are using AI/ML models to really understand what line of code is not going to scale. And we also have impact of how much CPU consumption is this line of code taking. Based on that, we'll give you insights on what should you do about it. What is the right code that you need to put in there to make your code more scalable. So we are giving code recommendations too. So we are doing detection, we are doing pattern matching, we are doing runtime information around how much CPU is it consuming. And then also we are giving you the recommended code itself so that you can directly plug it into your builders and check it in. All right, so enough presentation. Let's go right into the demo. So here I have my screen. This is a demo org. In setup, you just have to search the word scale and you'll start seeing Scale Center here. You'll see some of the pages here, org performance, performance analysis, and then Apex Guru that we talked about. Now, when you come to Scale Center, the first thing that you would do is just select a time frame. So there are two use cases, first of all, that you would come to Scale Center to. One is you have just conducted a performance test in your full copy and you really want to know what happened. And the second part is your users probably are complaining that there is some application slowness, generally speaking, and you want to be able to provide an answer of what happened, why is it slow, where is the bottleneck. So you can use production, full copy sandbox. Those are the two use cases. So let's say if you select, I'm just going to do 24-hour and you hit submit, this is where the request will go. to our backend monitoring sources, and we will pull in data real time. So you see how quick that was. You can actually go back as early as last 10 minutes in your production, and you can start seeing what happened 10 minutes ago. The first thing that you'll see is these metrics, top line metrics. You'll see logins, failed logins, concurrent Apex UI, rollout, callout. These are some of the use cases that our customers said over and over that they reoccur, and they are the most common ones. When you go deeper, you see this traffic pattern of your org. So you see whether, it's REST API, SOAP, report, what was running at that point and what is causing the spike. So if you go to these individual log lines, you will be able to actually see where the traffic exists. The next one is the volume. This chart customers use to understand their peak. So when is it that the traffic is high on the org? So I see this is one point. I see this is another point. These two are interestingly times when I see a lot of user activity. So this is around 6 p.m. This is anytime between 1. So between 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. there's traffic. In the night, obviously, there's low activity. This is the first time we're also giving you access to app and database CPU. So this, again, you'll see some correlation. If there is more volume, obviously the app and the database is also being consumed heavily. Same things here. But this is like a normal flow. Sometimes what you would see is your volume might not be much, but you'll see these peaks in your database or your app. This is where you would want to dive deeper to see what was happening behind the scene. We also have logins. This is your failed logins line. This is the successful ones, and then errors. So here you see there is a spike on rollogs, around 8,000 rollogs caused at this point in time. And then this is your call out time. Now, as a customer, obviously this caught my attention. I want to understand what caused the rollout. I'm just going to select that peak spike that I saw, and I'm going to run a further investigation. So we have a couple of things, not couple actually, we have 10 or so investigations. You can do, since this was a rollock error, I'm just going to do rollock, but you also have integration list view, governor limits, flow. We talked a lot about flow, database, and then some around Apex. So when I do this, you can just give your report name. And once you start the report, that is where it will actually go to this performance analysis page. And this is where you will start seeing the actual report that was generated of the rollock analysis. So rollock analysis will look something like this. I'm just going to open a sample one for now, but this is what you'll see. So if there is a spike, you go to rollock, it will tell you the most lock object was campaign. It had 32 rollouts. So if you see 65% of your rollouts are being caused by this object, we also give you user IDs on what was contributing to the lock. So let's say if you have a batch job that is importing campaign data, your user ID would probably be that batch user that you have created, or an integration user. So this is where you can troubleshoot what was exactly happening. We also give you the entry points. So here you can see based on the runtime information, which was the entry point that was causing it. So here, there's a future call, VF remoting, Apex. Where is it that you're getting blocked? So this is a quick triaging for you to do without having to reach out to TAM or support or anybody from Salesforce. This is a consolidated report. So if I go back to here, I was showing the drop down. So one of the things that you can do is run a consolidated report, which is basically it will bring back all of these investigations. So for the consolidated report, what you would see in Apex concurrency, for example, is what was their concurrency count, what were the contributors. So, there was this chat API. You'll see this table. You can sort it again by count. You can sort it by database CPU. This will basically show you exactly where the concurrency was occurring so that you can tune it further. Summary will show you most used classes and then the slowest classes. So again, all these tables are sortable. You can see which classes you need to optimize fairly quickly. Database performance is one of our most powerful features. This is where we will tell you exactly where the time is being spent. So this gives you the apex entry point where what is consuming the database CPU. And we are also giving you the exact stock will. So you'll get this stock will in your code, which will tell you this is where you need to look at. If it's a report, you'll get the report ID. So anywhere that the database time is being spent. So if you look at these, you'll get the top 3 or the top 5 heavy hitters. Same thing, we'll give you a profile on which users are contributing, what entry points, what type of transactions are happening at that time, what kind of DML operations are happening. So lots of updates, inserts, deletes. This is where you can see your profile on the database level. Similarly, if there is failed logins, there will be details around why the logins failed, whether it was an unrestricted IP. This is where you can understand what's happening. Flow performance, we'll give you the types of flows, counts, min, max, governor limits if there were any breached. Integration would be types of APIs that are being called, how many are over 5 seconds. You can filter that list here. And list views and reports, same thing, which reports are over 5 seconds. Rollock, I think we saw. So this is basically, for a given time, you're getting whole report, an entire performance profile of your org on what other things that you need to optimize here. The next feature that you saw on the slide was Apex Guru. This is in pilot. This is what I was talking about, the AI/ML code recommendations. So we do a quick scan of your org on a weekly basis. If you take one of the reports, we will tell you, here are critical, major, minor. We will detect anti-patterns. So here we are saying, if you need small number of S object types, use a fast method that consumes less CPU. We'll tell you what is the line that is causing the spike, which is the entry point, and we'll also give you the exact code that you need to replace with. This is extremely powerful in terms of you being able to do quick fixes. So not only you don't need to research to see what can be done to optimize, but we are telling you exactly what code you need to plug it in, and you can copy it and you can paste it in your IDE and you're good to go. So this is in terms of critical, major, minor. Obviously, you would look at critical ones first. In the future, we are also going to give some impact metrics. So how much of CPU will you save if you make this change, so on and so forth. So that runtime information is also going to come in the product. Obviously, we have a huge roadmap. We are going to look at platform cache, platform events, everything, all the core platform features that we want to integrate. And we will start turning them on one by one. One quick call out is the data that you see in the org performance page. We go back 30 days in time. So if you want to look at something, you can only go back 30 days, beyond which you won't be able to get the data. So you see September 5th is not available. And then secondly, this time window that you select, you can select up to 24 hours. The reason we do that is because the more narrow the window, the better your tracing would be, the better your analysis would come back, because you're really interested in that one spike, one throttle, one limit hit on triaging what happened there. So that's Scale Center for you. The scale testing that I was talking about, these are, again, this is a demo out, so we have some features already available here, but this is in pilot. This is where you can get the request for upgrading your sandbox for an interim time period, 1 week or few days, to do performance testing. So that's all I had for Scale Center. I think one feature that I didn't show was this compare feature. So let's say if you're doing a performance test, you do some baseline runs, you select maybe there was something that you did on the 29th, and you've deployed new code on 6th. you can do a comparison between these two time frames to see what happened. Did your new code cause additional errors? Here we see the errors went down. That means whatever you checked in is actually performing better than what code you had. So this is a performance comparison page that you can also do both in Sandbox and in production. All right, let me go back. So this was the demo. In terms of the adoption, we've been live since June 19. So we went live in summer. We already have 2,500 orgs or so actively using scale centers, users from all over the place, and investigations being generated. We've seen tremendous growth. If you haven't watched the keynote, you can see the same thing there as well. We did a quick demo in the dev keynote as well as architect keynote. In terms of roadmap, scale testing will be available for US region later this year. You'll have test plan creation as part of that, as well as scheduling book slots to upgrade your sandbox. Scale Center is available now. Apex Guru is in pilot now, and we will continue to go beta and then GA eventually sometime next year. We are going to bring in more AI insights around search, reports, list views. We are also looking at building a GPT, which will explain users how to troubleshoot using Scale Center. So that is also on the roadmap. And then we are also working with a few ISVs to do a pilot for Scale Center for ISV. That is all I had. Probably take some questions here.
Yes, I guess I can take that up. There are some questions in chat. There is first one from Arun. Can you actually export the scale center metrics or logs somewhere? And can you transfer it to another system if you really cannot try to export it?
Not at the moment. We are looking at having a PDF extract, which will come quickly in terms of getting those insights out. But today, Scale Center is not just available for sysadmins. You can also select up to 5 other users that can access it. So if you want the export for developers to use it, you can do that using that user permission that we just rolled out for developers or testers or anybody to go and see the insights directly in the org.
Right, thank you. Another question was from myself. It was about the exceptions and which are thrown by code. If it was actually caught inside of the Apex, would it still appear in the Scale Center metrics or log?
Yes, developer exceptions, SOCWL 101, things like that, we will be able to catch, and you'll see it under the govern elements investigations.
Right. Is there any other question I can check?
There was one, George, about, well, actually, I think, Marlene, it was yours. Maybe you want to ask it.
You're on mute, Marlene.
Thank you. I know one of them you answered that you're thinking it'll go GA next year, not current year, right?
For which part?
For Apex Guru?
Yeah, sometime next year.
And I'm forgetting if I asked another question, Lilith.
Another question, but I did see a remark or a comment, which I think is an interesting one indeed. We saw in your demo, which was really good, thank you so much, that sometimes when we get some information, some metrics, we see an ID, but it's a typical Salesforce ID, for example, users taking the most time. And yeah, that's not always a human readable, of course.
Yeah, so the reason we have the ID is more of a legal and compliance issue. We had a few customers who said we do not want everybody to see who the user is, and only certain people should be able to access it. So that's the reason why there are IDs. What we are going to do though is we are going to provide a drill down on that ID to the direct user record. That way, whatever permissions your admin for the org has set up, if you have access to see the user record, you will be able to see it. If not, it will give you an error, but that would be more controlled by your org's admin. So the reason you don't see names is because some customers didn't want us to, but we will provide a drill down so that it's easier for you to quickly drill down and see who the user is if you have the right permissions to see it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if there is no more question, and I think that that's the case, I would like to summarize what's happening. So recording of this meeting would be available on YouTube as usual. Please subscribe to the channel if you're now watching this video. We will keep you posted on any other topics which would be there. And the most important, which I mentioned before, if you're interested yourself in presenting or in helping our group, please reach out. That would be it. Thank you all for your time, and thanks to our speakers.
Thank you, everybody. I've pinged the Trailblazer community where you can reach out to us if you have any feedback, questions, product requests. Please feel free to do so.
Thank you so much. And it was really, really fascinating. We got a lot of interesting chatter in the comments. Thank you both so much. We hope to see you again soon for another session, especially anything that comes up, Karishma, let us know. We're curious and eagerly following the skill sets evolutions.
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. This was great.
Likewise, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. Have a great evening, and thank you all for Belgium, at least it is. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.